Now, for every incredible new game that we're treated to, there seems like an increasing amount of blockbuster titles that have failed to impress. Despite the excitement surrounding them, the likes of Gotham Knights, The Callisto Protocol, and Forspoken each crashed hard upon release with disappointing gameplay and rather lackluster receptions. However, it's not difficult to see why AAA titles keep bombing after looking at the reasons behind their failures. And that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 reasons that AAA video games keep bombing. Number 10. Rushing out unfinished games. With so many huge game releases constantly being announced, there's always something to look forward to. The problem is that we, as an audience, are incredibly impatient folks and would prefer to have these new titles sooner rather than later. However, video game development is a complicated procedure that requires massive amounts of work from passionate teams. Especially as games are getting bigger and more advanced, actually ensuring that they work as intended subsequently becomes a greater undertaking. But deadlines do have to be met in order to appease shareholders and customers. So consequently, too many games are being released unfinished. While day one patches can mend some of the issues, many AAA games nevertheless arrive in a rather sorry state. And just as bad is when games release with only a fraction of the content that was promised. Halo Infinite releasing without campaign co-op or forge mode proved to be a huge misstep for 343. The games industry needs to learn to take its time and be more patient in the future. As Shigeru Miyamoto once said, a delayed game is eventually good, but a bad game is forever bad. Number 9. Too much studio interference. It's vital that everyone involved in a large AAA project understands what needs to be done in order to achieve a singular creative vision. From art design, voice acting, and music, every one of the various components in the development process must come together into one cohesive whole if a game is going to succeed. And while ideas will organically change and evolve throughout the development process, things tend to go wrong when studio executives meddle with developers' visions too much. Look no further than the recent PlayStation outing Forspoken to see what happens when ideas are interfered with. According to one of the original writers, Gary Whitta, the version of the game that he worked on was nothing like the final product. After creating the initial idea for the game alongside conceptualizing the magical world it would take place in, Whitta was then approached by the studio and informed that the story was going to be rebooted. He, however, was unavailable to work on the new script. What happened was a new team of writers were brought in to bring a version of somebody else's idea to life. The result was a bland game that lacked in both originality and personality. Number 8. Focusing on live services. There was a time when the prospect of a live service game sounded rather appealing. With updated content being added over time, there would always be something new to do so that players could keep coming back for more. With Destiny, Fortnite, and Warzone dominating the charts during the honeymoon period of live service titles, nowadays the love affair has officially worn off. Now this model has become little more than a lazy means for studios to generate some money. While there are still a handful of games out there that know how to implement a live service into their ecosystems, this is the exception to the rule. Nowadays, AAA games put their live services front and center, and to see just how damaging this business move can be, just look at Halo Infinite. With progression in the multiplayer mode tied solely to the overpriced season passes and cosmetics, grinding through the challenge-based level system quickly becomes a soulless endeavor. Likewise, with 343 putting all of their focus into the free multiplayer mode rather than the paid-for campaign, it was clear to players that the studio was more interested in making money than the next-gen Halo game that fans actually wanted. Number 7. Big but open worlds. Now, there's a conception within the video game industry that sequels need to be a substantial improvement upon what came before. They must have shinier graphics, slicker gameplay, a grander story, and, most importantly, a map that needs to feel far bigger than before. Now, it's a cliche that developers will proudly boast about how vastly expansive the map is and that everything you see is explorable. The trouble is, though, is that bigger doesn't always mean better, especially in open world games where it's not so much the map size that counts, but the quality of the content within it. Whereas games like Breath of the Wild, The Witcher 3, and Red Dead Redemption 2 brought their respective environments to life with meaningful interactions and surprising discoveries that fully immerse the player, this is unfortunately less common in contemporary titles. Typically, modern games are set within expansive worlds but feel rather empty. Instead of meaningful and meaty content for players to discover, the maps of Forspoken, the Saints Row reboot, and even Cyberpunk 2077 in places were packed with empty space and lackluster checklists of objectives for people to complete. These lifeless worlds detract from a game's quality, and audiences, they are starting to get very tired of it. Number 6. Unoriginal spiritual successors. Now, the term spiritual successor has been thrown around in the video games industry for some years now. The term is used to inform players about a game's influences while giving them an idea about what they can expect from the title when it launches. Though the term itself isn't an indicator of failure, with plenty of incredible games like BioShock and Outer Worlds being dubbed spiritual successors, the problem arises when said game is unable to bring anything of its own ideas to the table, and the Callisto Protocol is the perfect example of this happening. Marketed as a spiritual successor to the Dead Space franchise, there were a lot of striking similarities between the Callisto Protocol and this survival horror classic. Both saw protagonists fighting grotesque alien creatures in confined environments, they had similar HUD designs, and each had a strong focus on establishing atmosphere. However, while the Callisto Protocol excelled in creating sickening gore and a rather eerie setting, it unfortunately fell far short when it came to its combat and storytelling. With nothing unique to distinguish it from its inspirations, TCP, alongside other soulless successors, fell into the realm of uninspired mediocrity and consequently flopped pretty bloody hard. Number 5. Grinding isn't fun. As games become bigger and more exciting titles compete for players' attention, developers have found themselves in a position where keeping their game relevant for longer is necessary to avoid being drowned out by the competition. And one way that studios have found a means to do this is by making their games a massive time sink for players who want to see it through to the end. Now, while it's important that games are balanced in such a way that earning the rarest rewards is never too easy, because that just wouldn't be that satisfying, there are too many games these days that opt to make acquiring anything a tiresome and never-ending chore. Whether it's the mind-numbing cycle of acquiring loot in Destiny's endgame, playing countless matches in Halo Infinite in order to complete challenges, or even trudging your way through the 1,000 levels for each faction in Sea of Thieves PvP mode, it doesn't take long for the enjoyment to dissipate from these tasks. It gets to the point when the work and time that players are expected to put into a game isn't worth the rewards. Seeing that an upcoming game will require plenty of grinding is now enough to stop audiences from giving it their time. Number 4. Lifeless sequels. The games industry is one built on franchises that will have players coming back on name recognition alone. However, even within these mammoth AAA titans, innovation is needed to stop things from becoming stale. Whether it's having multiple and ongoing spin-off series, introducing new gameplay mechanics, or toying with genre, creativity is required if a series is to survive for long. What doesn't work, though, is when developers take the easy option and serve players another helping of the exact same experience that they've had countless times before, and the recent Saints Row reboot did just that. Though this modern reimagining of the series put aside the over-the-top campiness from the later games in favor of the more grounded approach of the first game, the fifth installment was nevertheless overflowing with all of the same outdated tropes and gameplay mechanics and humor from the 2006 original. The same cut-and-paste objectives from the Saints Row franchise were already starting to wear thin by the time it ventured into literal hell. Playing the same mission types in 2022, well, that was just overkill. Relying on name recognition alone isn't enough to guarantee success. It therefore wasn't a surprise that barely anyone joined the 3rd Street Saints on their latest crime spree. Number 3. Too many games and not enough time or money. With the games industry being as big as it is today, there are now so many releases for players to choose from at any given time. Now, while this sounds like it could only be a good thing, there is a considerable downside to a crowded market. You see, there's just not enough time in the world for you to work your way through each big new release, and with games becoming more expansive in recent years, players will often find themselves having to decide more carefully about which of the dozen new titles that they're willing to spend their hard-earned money on. The unfortunate result of this is that some games will get left behind in the sales charts even if they are bloody brilliant. And look no further than Marvel Midnight Suns, an XCOM-style RPG that boasted exhilarating turn-based combat featuring a roster of fan-favorite characters as example of this. Because this superhero game was praised from both critics and fans alike, but despite being a solid outing, Midnight Suns was a catastrophic failure in terms of sales. Releasing close to the holiday season and on the same day as the Callisto Protocol, Midnight Suns was an unfortunate case of a great game that was overshadowed by other releases. Number 2. Bodged marketing. With so many releases vying for players' attention at any one time, all it takes is one misstep from developers to see all that goodwill towards a project disappear. For audiences to become interested in a game, they want to be impressed by the trailers and gameplay footage that's shown, especially now in a digital age where the internet and social media have become judge, jury, and executioner. Prospective audiences have become exceedingly more critical about the marketing material they see. When something falls short of the expected standard, however, it doesn't take long for it to become the center of ridicule. It happens happened when the bug-riddled footage of Mass Effect Andromeda hit the internet, and again when disapproving onlookers saw the new Dante in DMC Devil May Cry, and Microsoft definitely had their work cut out for them after a disastrous Xbox One reveal. Another notable example came when the comically unpolished character model that was dubbed Craig by the internet appeared in footage for Halo Infinite. This was not the level of fidelity that Halo fans were hoping for from the next-gen entry in Microsoft's flagship franchise. Hundreds of memes were consequently born as excitement for this AAA game took an absolute nosedive. And number 1, relying entirely on current trends. When Rocksteady released gameplay footage for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, audiences let out a collective sigh of disappointment. Though the concept of playing as villains within the Arkham universe remains an exciting one, this game looked to be anything but original. Combining every overused gameplay trend from 4-player co-op, a battle pass, menus overflowing with stats, and looter-shooter mechanics taking center stage, Kill the Justice League came across like an unappetizing concoction of all of the worst modern gameplay tropes to the point that it looked to have no discernible personality of its own. Much like Crystal Dynamics' Avengers game, titles which rely too heavily on the same overdone trends feel more like they were conceived in boardrooms by money-grubbing shareholders rather than from the minds of passionate developers. With these tropes already becoming stale and outdated, any title that bases its core gameplay around them is likely to be a soulless cash grab for publishers to squeeze as much money as they can from players for as long as possible. And while it is possible for developers to smartly incorporate trends into their gameplay, doing so requires a degree of creativity and innovation that Kill the Justice League, well, it appears to lack. And there we go, my friends, those were 10 reasons AAA video games keep bombing. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules, so you can go follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, where it's at RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there, my friends. As always, I've been Jules, you have been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.